are here, so let's go ahead and get started because I want to allow for plenty of time to chat. I'd like to introduce to you Miriam Lacroix, who went to PACE here and worked for the Immigration Justice Clinic that I was talking about earlier, and she's now an Immigrant Justice Corps Fellow,
Yes.
right,
Mm-hmm.
at the New York City Bar. And she will tell you about her work as well as, the immigration issue in a broader sense, and I think she will be a great resource for us as we start to look at this issue in our class. So, Miriam, take it away.
Sure. Hi. As Professor Fink has mentioned, my name is Miriam. I am a new law school graduate. I graduated law school last year, May 2014, and I'm just been admitted for the past 3 months or so. So I graduated from PACE Law School. I also went to PACE undergrad and studied political science before I went to law school. And in law school, I took part in the Immigration Justice Clinic, which is a clinic for law students to act as attorneys. We were able to represent clients and do all things that lawyers are allowed to do under the supervision of a professor. Professor Vanessa Merton supervised me, and as far as I understand, she is helping your professor get some clients for you guys to interview for your projects. So I think she is a great person to work with. At the clinic, I did what we would call humanitarian immigration. So I worked a lot with victims of crimes, people seeking asylum because they're afraid of persecution in their home countries. I also did a lot of advocacy for policy change. So I had a meeting with our local senator. I believe she's the senator for district as well, Stuart Cousins. And I discussed with her common issues that most of my clients had. One of which, I can give you an example. One of my clients, while I was in the clinic, she was undocumented. She entered the US as a tourist and decided that she wanted to stay, so she went to a private attorney and was like, how can I stay here? And the attorney said, well, give me $5,000 and you can get a green card. And she doesn't know the immigration laws. The attorney obviously was being unethical because you can't just get a green card. There has to be some sort of latch. You have to marry someone or have a visa or a host of other things, but you can't just pay for a green card. So she did that, and she, weeks went by, months went by, years went by. She paid her money, but she didn't hear anything from the attorney, and she didn't have her green card. At that point, she had overstayed her visa. So what happens when you overstay a visa here in the US, you are subject to a 3- and 10-year bar from returning to the US. So she overstayed her visa over 6 months. When you overstay over 6 months, you have a 10-year bar. So if she would have gone back to Jamaica, she would have been barred for 10 years for returning here. So now she was in a situation where I could go home, but if I go home, I can't come back here. So she decided to stay, because she's undocumented, she doesn't have work authorization. So technically she cannot work. She worked anyway, like most people, and she was getting unfair jobs, not being paid fairly because she was undocumented. So what happened with the lawyers, there was a civil suit against him because he had done this to multiple people, and he sort of just got a slap on the wrist. Nothing, had to pay the money back to the people he took the money from, and his license was suspended. His license wasn't even fully revoked. I think it was suspended for a short amount of time. But what happens to her? She has no relief. She's still here, undocumented, with no relief. She hasn't married a US citizen or a green card holder. So one of my duties as a student attorney in the clinic was to advocate for her, people like her who have gone through things like this, and there's no recourse. So quickly, I don't want this to be sort of like a legal talk, so I'll just do this quickly so that you understand. So under immigration law, there's something called a U visa, and it's not really a visa, it's U non-immigrant status. It's a status that gives you deferred action, meaning that you won't be deported or removed, and it also gives you work authorization. So in order to be eligible for something like a U visa, you have to fall victim to a crime that's within the statute. And it's very narrow, of course, so it's like serious crimes like attempted murder, rape, felony assault, things like that. But the crime of fraud, or what we would call notarial fraud, which is people pretending to be attorneys when they're not, is not one of the qualifying crimes under the statute. So she would be ineligible, although she is a crime victim, and that lawyer was convicted of something. She would not be eligible for that. So we sort of tried to get the senator to talk to her colleagues and see if there's something she could do. We also went to DC and did some lobbying with congressional representatives as well. So right now, after the clinic, I applied to be an Immigrant Justice Corps Fellow. As your professor mentioned, it's a fellowship in New York City. It's a 2-year fellowship that is for law school graduates and college graduates. Of course, the law school graduates would be attorneys, and the college graduates would be accredited representatives, which is like almost an attorney. You can represent clients in that capacity. As an Immigrant Justice Corps Fellow, I work at the City Bar Justice Center, and I still do humanitarian immigration. I work with people seeking asylum, crime victims, trafficking victims, and mostly domestic violence victims, because there are areas of relief for people who go through those types of crimes. So basically, just so I can just get an idea where people are from, does anyone here specifically have an immigration story themselves? Anyone here immigrate to the US? You don't have to talk, or you just raise your hand. You immigrated to the US? Anyone else? Anyone's families have families that came here from the US? Came here from another country to the US? Okay, so you guys seem to have immigrant backgrounds, and I'm not surprised because we're in the US and this is a country that's sort of built on immigration. And I think it's sort of surprising to me, a country that's built on immigration has a lot of negative views towards immigrants. In my field, I've been working in immigration for only 2 years. I'm a very new attorney, very new to the field, but already I see a lot of pushback from people in all aspects of my life, family members, coworkers, other professionals, asking me why I chose to go into the field I'm in. Why am I helping them when there are people here that need help first? So there's always this us versus them argument that people try to make, and being in the field that I'm in, I'm often offended. So I wanted to talk about today some of the misconceptions that people have about immigrants in the US. And I think it's really important for the work that you guys are doing, and I think that you all can make a positive impact in changing how people view immigrants in the US. So what are some of the stereotypes that some of you have heard about immigrants? They're going to take our jobs. They're
lazy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't pay taxes, they don't pay social.
Yep. You raise your hand? So, so you said they're going to take our jobs. That is definitely a very common thing we hear, whether it be in the media or just people we know. I didn't mean to print this on such big paper, so I apologize. This is supposed to be on regular paper, but the printer at my job just decided that it wanted to do this, which is better because you can see it better. I'm going to hand these out because they're common myths and misconceptions about immigrants, and I think this is really helpful because not only does it give you the myth, but then it gives you the truth. Oh, I might not have given enough, but let's see. Let me pass this back. You're welcome. You're welcome. Oop. Here you go. So I didn't make this. I can't take the credit for this. This came from the Lutheran. Would you like one? Oh, you have one. This came from the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service website. And basically, the things that you all mentioned are exactly what they mentioned here. We can start with immigrants take jobs away from U.S. citizens. So in my work, I've noticed that immigration into the U.S., the fact that there's an immigrant presence makes more jobs available because there's more of a demand. Not only is there more of a demand, but immigrants are very likely to start their own businesses. So they create jobs for other immigrants and other people who aren't immigrants who have other types of status. And frankly, most of my clients aren't doing professional jobs. They're doing construction, they're working in restaurants, they're working and manufacturers. We know that in the work that I do, I know that that is false. Most immigrants are here illegally. That's something I hear a lot because with the surge at the border currently going on and a lot of women and children coming across the border for different types of reasons, many people are just making assumptions. They're saying many immigrants are here illegally. They're just crossing the border and here. But that's in fact not true. 72% of immigrants within the US are here under some sort of lawful status, whether they're students, they're here on working visas, they're here on tourist visas, they're here because they're unifying with their families. Did someone say immigrants increase crime? Did anyone say that? Okay, I know there was a bunch going on.
Donald Trump said that.
Yeah, so that was gonna be my next point. It's definitely a common misconception, and it's something that's sort of being perpetuated now that this political campaign is happening. Donald Trump did say that, Mexico is sending their criminals and they're sending people to rape us. We can watch that and know that it's not true, but unfortunately, he's not the only person with that opinion. And in fact, I think here they have California at the bottom because that's one of the places that's mostly populated with immigrants above New York. But in fact, they say that since the undocumented population has doubled, crime rates have actually decreased. So it shows that immigrants have no bearing on the amount of crime happening in the US. In fact, if they were, then when more immigrants come, we would have more crime, which is not the case. Let's see, what else did we say? Immigrants don't pay taxes. So a lot of people don't know that although the IRS and Department of Homeland Security or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services are federal agencies, they're not connected. So they issue something called tax identification numbers to people even if they don't have a social security number. So many of my clients, or all of my clients who work, although they work and they're paid cash, they pay taxes every year using their tax identification number. I can't lie and say that all of my clients do. There might be one or two that don't, but to sort of make this generalization about all immigrants not paying taxes is wrong, and something that we should try to combat. Let's see. Is there something someone else said that we didn't talk about? Said taking our jobs, not paying taxes.
You said they're lazy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
you can go ahead.
Yeah, they come here and they just like pretty much sit here, just like use the government money.
Mm-hmm.
That's like not true at all.
You want to add to? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, one of the other things is that they reproduce too much.
Hmm.
It's true that a lot of people
They what?
reproduce too much.
So is that something that's
I don't think that that's the myth. I think that they'll come here to have their kids
and then return? So they have U.S.
return,
citizen children.
or just have them here just to have them have U.S.
Right.
citizenship,
Right.
not just. No, I don't think making.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably an issue not designated just to immigrants. I think when people even talk about people on welfare, they talk about people who often have too many kids so that they can get more welfare. So I think that is an issue, and that is a myth, and I think it's a myth broader than just immigrants. But yes, that's also another thing. Going back to immigrants being lazy, I don't know if you guys read in the newspaper recently, I believe it happened in Spring Valley, where a company, I'm not sure who the company is, put out a job posting. And the job posting described the job, and it said, no Haitians, right?
No Asians.
Haitians.
Oh,
Haitian. Mm-hmm. I don't know what possessed them to do that. It might be because of the stereotype that you mentioned. Maybe they've experienced, they're like, this is a lazy group. We don't want that group. And for your point, where it's a common misconception that immigrants come here to have their children so that they have U.S. citizen children. That is something that's really big now, and I think in Texas, thankfully not in the U.S., they're trying to, or they've already passed a law, or a judge has already decided that children born in the U.S. to foreign parents or undocumented parents would not be considered U.S. citizens.
Where was this again?
This is in Texas. If I can find, I can send it to you guys. I'm not exactly sure. This is like within the last few weeks. Hold on. I know it's in my email because I get a bunch of emails, and I can send it to you guys. I could have, it might be a court case. So it's not specific. It's not, it has to be a court case. It's not broad to the whole United States. I'm sorry. Let me find it. But I know there was something that came out about that. Once I find it, after I'm done here, I can send it to you and you can send it to the class. And forgive me if I have the facts incorrect, but I know it was something very egregious. So does anybody have any other things to add to this or any questions? Yeah.
So the immigrants, they pay taxes by getting this like identification number?
Tax ID number.
Tax ID number. So how would they receive that number if they're not documented?
So what happens is you can apply to the IRS for the number, and they don't ask you for Social Security information. Why would
Why would they not ask you for that?
so
I mean, logically for their portion, obviously it would make sense so that they can allow this to happen without really allowing it to happen.
yeah. From what you're saying, basically the IRS doesn't care whether you're documented or not. They want you to pay taxes. And it's really hard for people who don't pay taxes to obtain status here, especially if they're in removal proceedings. So if you can't prove that you've been paying taxes, that's something negative against you that the judge will hold against you and that the government attorney will hold against you as well. But the IRS and Department of Homeland Security don't contact each other. So the IRS is not telling, DHS that, oh, I have this person that doesn't have a Social Security number. They might actually be undocumented. So they just want their money. They're not really concerned whether or not.
Do you know the reason why they would not contact each other? Why they would not be in contact as they're both U.S. federal agencies?
Well, I'm not exactly sure of the reason, but I think it has to do with confidentiality. A lot of the things you submit to the government as far as immigration is concerned is confidential.
Even to other government entities?
I'm sorry?
Even to other government entities?
Right. especially since a lot of things that immigrants submit in order to obtain status is sensitive information, like persecution from another country or things like that. I can't tell you what they're thinking, what the IRS is thinking by not, what their thought process is or why they don't do it, but that's just my own guess. Yeah.
If they don't have to apply for ID numbers, what would be some pros for them, like the reasons why they would want to apply for ID numbers?
For the tax ID numbers? Well, one, it helps, you can start your own business that way. A lot of immigrants have started their own businesses without their social security numbers by using the tax ID numbers. Paying your taxes. I'm not sure of anything else that they would use it for. I know they're not supposed to use it for, like on job applications where it asks you for your social security number and they put in the tax ID number, but sometimes they do and they get through. Yes.
I was also going to mention that they straight up pay sales tax, just like everybody else.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Contributes to the economy.
Of course, that's a really good point. No. Okay. So another question is, where exactly do you think these myths are coming from? Like, I'm sure, Donald Trump is not working in the IRS to determine who's paying taxes and who's not.
Privileged Americans?
So privilege has a lot to do with it. The fact that many of us were born with citizenship and feel entitled to certain things within this country, we sort of feel like something is being taken away from us when other people are getting advances.
Actual racist?
Yes. They're definitely coming from actual racists. Good point.
I guess common experience, meaning that they may go somewhere and they see frequently people from another country, and they feel not invaded, but they feel what's a good word? Just the experience of having people from different nationalities around them, because that sense of not being the same as others, they suddenly the contrast between them is really stark, and that maybe that could cause that could have a consequence, a reaction to that, like, oh wait, why are these many different people around me, and that just lead to fear or some sort of ignorance about it.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Also, people may experience some lazy immigrants like they may experience some lazy U.S. citizens, and they sort of generalize and they think, well, this must be all of them if this is my experience with them. So I think that's definitely a good point. Any other ideas or additions?
I was gonna say also, I think media coverage too contributes to that. That's what people see is they'll see the story of I don't know, people trying to pass the border, people in court cases and stuff like that. But you don't see necessarily the store owner who's contributing to the community.
Yeah.
And is having all these opportunities to open up the children and go someplace and other things.
Definitely, and that was going to be my next point, unless someone else needed to contribute. I definitely, that was going to be my next point. Basically, the media has a big impact on how people view certain issues. So, me as a non-media person, or I'm not a journalist, I'm just a regular person, I open up the newspaper and I read something, and sometimes I take on the opinion of the person writing that, or I take on the opinion of someone on MSNBC because I feel like, yes, I agree with them. And immigrants are sometimes portrayed in a way that perpetuates these negative stereotypes. So the question is, how can you all, as journalists, as people working in the media, combat these negative stereotypes and make a difference? And I think as journalists, you have the perfect platform to do so. And you have the perfect platform to change the way people view things, and especially immigrants. So because immigration is such a complex area of the law, it's important that you sort of express that in your work, and also show who immigrant families really are. And I think a lot of the media, or a lot of coverage on immigration has to do with statistics. And no one's really showing the faces or giving a voice to the people that are here.
I'm sorry, you mentioned statistics. I was just wondering how this information was gathered.
That's probably a good question that I don't know the answer to, because I got it online from this Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services. I'm assuming they didn't do the study themselves. But the website is on the bottom of this, so that's probably something that you could find, maybe, or contact them.
Source, they cite a New York Times article for the third stat,
Let's see.
but it's unclear whether all of them are from that same article if they come from other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't know exactly where all this information comes from. I just printed it to sort of give you an idea. Very good question. That'll make me want to look that up before I ever speak in front of a class again. I was saying that I think many immigrants aren't given a voice, and there isn't really a face to all these stories. I think how you can help is what you're doing now. You're going to be interviewing real people about real issues. And also, I think another important thing is language, the language you choose to use and how you choose to describe immigrants and what they're doing. One good example is the term alien. I think that's a term that's very widely used. It's used in the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's used in a bunch of immigration statutes. And immigration practitioners have been trying for a really long time to stop the use of alien, because, I mean, if you think of the term alien, you think of an outsider, you think of something that you don't want around. So that's a really good example of language that you shouldn't use. Immigrant is fine. Other language would be illegal. No one wants to be called illegal. Illegal is something that relates to some sort of criminal act, and it's been argued that it's criminal to, cross the border and things like that. But when you're someone who's facing persecution in your home country, if you're a victim of domestic violence or gang violence, sometimes that's your only choice. So you don't want to be referred to as illegal. Many practitioners prefer undocumented. So those are just a couple of examples of ways that you can sort of combat these negative things, sort of stop it, is the language that you use.
Do you think, is there any, I've heard some people try to make the argument that saying illegal immigrant is not preferable. Some people say, well, immigrants who are here illegally, is that any better? Or is the word illegal should you just avoid that word?
I think immigrants that are here illegally is probably better, but I choose not to use I try not to use the term at all. I think even unlawful sort of sounds a little bit better, but it still sounds.
The term undocumented sound better than any of them?
Definitely, and that's what immigration practitioners have been trying to change in the language of statutes, rather than saying, alien or illegal and things like that. Yes. But the point is to avoid using language that would, in fact, perpetuate this negative view of, like, if you continuously use illegal or alien, it's stamping immigrants with this, you know, unwanted thing.
That's definitely not right.
Right.
People who do the right thing and, you know, go through the proper processes. Of course, you don't want to call them something they're not. But if someone's not here, you know, it's not fair to people that do that. That people are coming in and not going through all those same processes.
I think
Well,
one,
but people who go through the standard processes where they get a visa first and all that, then they wouldn't be called illegal and undocumented or anything to start with, right? Because they have
Right.
So it is about people who come here and, you know, can be technically considered to be here illegally, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what we're really talking about. We're
Right,
not talking
because-
about the people who go through the sort of standard.
Because if you do, you have status and you wouldn't be illegal or undocumented. The only way you would be is if you were here sort of under the radar and the government not knowing you're here.
I was going to go off of that. Unfortunately, when immigrants try to come here, the process is painfully outdated, as well as hard to do.
Yeah.
I've heard of cases where it takes as many as close to a decade to actually get everything done. And people just don't have time for that. They try to start the process, but it's for a lot of people, they can't do it, and they're not going to go back to a country where they don't have any opportunity, and they stay here illegally.
Yeah.
And they get demonized for it in the media and within the government, in
Oh, yeah.
certain facets of the government. And a lot of people don't realize how hard the process is and how many different steps you have to take
Yeah.
to get that even started.
Oh yeah. Especially if you don't have
And
some
you-
sort of hook to get you
you
here.
also need, you're supposed to have documentation from where you're coming from as well, and many of these people
Yeah.
don't have that documentation
Yeah.
because they're trying to escape these places. They're
Exactly.
Not just, let me grab all my documents and everything else. No, they just get out of it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
You know, the solution then wouldn't be changing the language doesn't change the process. Changing the process would
So-
be the solution.
So the-
Maybe expedite
we're
the
ju-
process and modernize it, which is definitely a great idea, which needs
Yeah.
to be done. I
Mhm.
agree with that.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of this class, we're talking about, you know, how the media can sort of change a negative view of immigrants. I'm not saying in any way that we, through the media, can change immigration policy. I think there's a lot more advocacy that needs to be done, but just for the purpose of this class, I think that was my point. Yes.
I just want to like just to add to like the conversations that are like the roles like in like journalism too is like to remain like objective, and I think because like the term itself like it's not like obviously like it is like a natural term, but the way that it has been used has like formed like a prejudice towards a large group of people, and because of that it gives a natural negative connotation that it's like no longer like just a word that's just the truth. Like people have used that word to like twist it, so that's why it's like as journalists like you can approach the story but without using that word because it's a word that's been twisted like for so many times that now you automatically give a negative connotation and you're choosing a side even if you don't mean to. It happens naturally.
I understand that and I agree with that, but don't you think like saying, I get that how you word things can have a great impact, but do you personally think that it wouldn't have the opposite effect? Because I mean, if you use the word so much, it loses its meaning. Like if you were to write alien or illegal or something like that,
Right.
I mean, it is what it is. But if you hide behind the word, like you try to go on the outskirts to change the word, doesn't it make you kind of look bad because you're trying to change what it actually is? I'm not sure if I'm making sense by the way I'm saying it. But like, because you know how people are like, I guess this is a minor example, but I guess like different used to be a bad thing, but now everybody's like, yeah, I'm different. So what? You're supposed to be unique. You're not supposed to be like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you use it enough in the proper context instead of hiding away from the word, you could actually change the meaning itself.
Right. I think that is a good point, and I also think that it could have the effect of changing the way people speak and think as well. I think repetition causes good change. So I see your point. I'm not sure how to answer.
For the law of changing it? Like
Well,
changing the word?
I don't think there's going to be a law of change, like to make people, but I am in favor of people changing the way they write when they're talking about immigrants. Yeah.
Off of this, I think that it's more about political correctness, right, what we're talking about, the politically correct way of speaking in regards to these types of people. I think the bigger issue is not that using the word illegal immigrant or illegals. I think the bigger issue is that we aren't, we, as in the media or as in the government, don't make a differentiation between the illegal immigrants and non-illegal immigrants that are documented. Meaning that they're just stroking them with a wide brush and saying that all immigrants, in the minds of a lot of Americans, are illegal. And that's what I think is the problem.
Yeah.
People don't take into account that some people have visas, some people have working permits, everything else, and they're just making them all. These are all illegal immigrants. All the illegals are taking our jobs. No, these people, a lot of these people have some sort of documentation, and I think that they have to be educated on that, not think that every immigrant is illegal. Everyone that does not speak English is illegal. And that's one of the things as well. When someone speaks only Spanish, they automatically think that they're an illegal immigrant.
Right.
I think that there's connotations, there's a perception based off of just that. And, and that has to change. The education by the government and by the media and by schools.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
That's the bigger problem.
Thank you.
So I think going back to that, with the problem with using the word illegal whenever it's mentioned in an article or like in the broadcasting news station, like they tend to say it in a bad way. So like if they mention illegal immigrants, they tend to say like maybe, oh, these illegal immigrants are crossing the border, or like this man who happens to be an illegal immigrant like beat up a woman or kidnap someone or whatever. Like that, the way it's used, it gives it a bad light. So in order for the word illegal to not be seen as a bad way, I guess you would have to either you start using undocumented or either use illegal immigrant, but the article itself or the feature itself has to be a good thing, a good portrayal of undocumented immigrants.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, you're right. It comes down to when you're writing any story, what details do you choose to include about the story and about people? Like, how do you even describe people? If you're describing, I remember when I, was reporting, my editors would really encourage me to do visuals. So when I'm working radio, we really like to encourage the listener to imagine, picture in your mind what this place looks like or what this. But whenever I had to describe what a person looked like, that weighed very heavily upon me, because it's like, well, what words would I use to describe this person in a very brief way? I mean, you're kind of reducing a person to a few adjectives, do I say this guy's bald? But then people will think, oh, the bald guy, is that how this person would want to, you know what I mean? So it's kind of a similar idea, do I need to include in this story that this person is an undocumented immigrant? Is that relevant for the story, or does this person just happen to be an undocumented immigrant and I'm throwing it in there because I don't know why? So it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, if they're being deported or something like that.
Right, if it's related to the story.
Right, and then it makes sense, yeah, definitely. I think a big thing, I have to do this myself when I'm interviewing my own clients and doing intakes and determining whether or not I should take on their case. I think we have to check our own biases and sort of, be objective and not let our own prejudice or bias take control of what we're trying to do. And that's something that I often struggle with because, for instance, we did an intake at the city bar of this woman who comes to us and says she has been a victim of domestic violence by her husband. And she doesn't tell us the whole story. It's just, I met him, they're 20 years apart, she's 20 years older, so there's one bias. I'm like, maybe USCIS won't believe that this is a good faith marriage, although it could very well be. She met him when they were both in court. And then we Google him and we find out he's this huge kingpin and has been arrested for like cocaine selling and possession and all this stuff. So she tells us that she had no idea that this is what was going on, and all of this could affect her immigration application, so we're very worried about submitting some sort of application if she could be implicated in this crime sometime in the future. So we look at her and we're, we have our own biases in thinking that she's probably involved in this, criminal scheme, and this probably wasn't good faith. This might have been marriage just so that she could get documents. And then we had to step back and say, wait, like, how are we looking at this? We're looking at this as, not as a practitioner trying to help her, but we're looking at it as if we're trying to, pick her apart or pick apart her story. So I think that's something that we all can learn in the work that we do.
Do you have any advice in terms of, so as students, as journalists in general, talk to immigrants, to learn about them and about their stories, other things to keep in mind to help us check our biases and be careful with our language so that we can keep an open mind but also not upset people we're talking to indicate that we're trying to act in good faith as journalists. I mean, and I'm thinking another Donald Trump example, like he keeps popping up. So Donald Trump made an appearance at, I want to say, a university last week, or maybe it was the week before, and a student was asking him, I forget the specific question, but I think it was something about an East Asian economy. I forget whether it was China or whether it was Korea. I think it was Korea. And the student was of Korean descent, but Donald Trump immediately, like the first thing Donald Trump said to him was, "Are you from Korea?" And the student said, "I was born in Texas." So it's those types of questions where, I mean, because I've read, and tell me whether or not you found this to be true, that, even asking someone where they're from can be kind of like, oh, what are you assuming that I'm not from here? Even just asking the question kind of carries this presumption, like, oh, by looking at you, I'm guessing that you are not from here.
Right. I think, as far, you mean going forward when you do start interviewing clients and things like that? I mean, just being honest with them and letting them know what you're doing, what the goal of your project is. I don't think that the people you're interviewing will be offended by the questions you ask, especially if you let them know why you're asking it. I think if you just randomly ask a question and they don't know why, they might become defensive. Any other advice?
Those of you who have immigrated, or your families have immigrated, have there been occasions like that when you felt like people are approaching conversations with you carrying these biases, and what types of things did they say that kind of like took you aback as far as things they said?
So people, I mean, I moved here when I was like 2 or 3, so I was practically raised here. But people would always, like, whenever they talk to me, they would kind of like higher their voices or like speak really slowly. I'm like, hi, like I speak English too. Like I'm a writer. I'm surprised. And people just kind of like get this, the stereotypical image of like immigrants who, you're an immigrant and you obviously have no knowledge, you have no education, you have no like just ongoing stereotypes.
Yeah, there's a stereotype that immigrants are not educated. When the majority of my clients have master's degree, maybe not from here, but from the UK or from their own country, because a lot of the times we don't accept other people's degrees. Like many of my clients from the Caribbean have nursing degrees, and they are nurses where they're from, but here they have to come and be a home health aide because it's assumed that their education system is not as good as ours.
And that's like really debatable.
And it's also assumed that they are uneducated in general. So a lot of the times when they're speaking slowly or sort of, I notice that people sometimes speak with an accent to someone with an accent, thinking that that is going to like help that person understand them. I hear my supervisors do it all the time. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean they don't understand you when you speak in your own accent. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's a good point.
Anything else? I mean, anything that you're thinking about in terms of like, you know, getting ready to work on these stories?
I mean, I guess for this project specifically, one of my biggest questions would be like, why they came here, but would that offend them? Like, why did you decide to come here?
I think it all depends, right? So there are people that come here for family reunification. They come here because their husband has petitioned for them, their child has petitioned for them. They want to be with their family. But a lot of people are coming here because a lot of traumatic things happen to them in their home country. And not that they would be offended by that question, but it might bring up some other trauma that they might not be expected to experience. So my recommendation would be maybe send them a list of your questions beforehand, or give them a chance to look it over, give them the chance to figure out what their comfort level is with the questions that you ask. And also, I'm not a journalist, so I don't even know if that's like what you do, like you give people questions ahead of time. I don't know. But if you don't, I think there's a way you can approach it. You can ask what their life was like in their home country. What is it about the U.S. that attracted them here? So I think there are like ways around sort of bringing up that trauma again.
That's good that you bring that up, because actually, and I guess we'll talk more about that next week, because there are different schools of thought among journalists about whether it's okay to send a list of questions, and I'm a bit in the middle on it. I'm generally against it, but there are certain instances when you're dealing with, I'm especially against it when you're dealing with people who are very accustomed to talking to the media. Because they often will say, like, oh, well, just send me a list of questions, because they want to figure out how to, you know,
Make
talk
something
with their
up.
PR people to make sure that they can, you know, think as carefully as possible so that nothing will come back to bite them. But with people who are just like regular people who are not really accustomed to dealing with the media, then I'm a little bit more flexible in that case. And at the very least, we could come up with a general statement to send to people to give them kind of some expectations about what types of things you want to.
Have you thought about having them like sign some sort of confidentiality statement saying, well, I don't know, you know, because most of the people you talk to probably will already have completed cases maybe, but if their case is ongoing, maybe they might not want their name or their face.
I've talked a little bit, so this might also be something that we have to handle on a case-by-case basis in terms of whether there are going to be sensitive things about their story that may put them at risk. You know, so if their cases aren't entirely resolved, or even if, you know, the circumstances under which they arrived, if that can come back to, you know, hurt them later, then, you know, we want to protect people we're talking to. So it'll just be kind of, you know, figuring that out as we go to see if, you know, to make sure that they're comfortable sharing, and that, you know, even if they're not aware of it, that we avoid putting them at risk for what they might share and not even realize might, you know, be harmful too.
Even if you told us that you haven't spent much time working in this, what is the case that has most impacted you, or the case that most struck you, or the one that something that really amazed you that you couldn't believe what was going on?
So the area that I work in is just automatically very traumatic, because I work with sex and labor trafficked people, domestic violence victims, people seeking asylum. And I think it comes from a place of privilege to feel like, oh my God, I can't believe that these things happen when it's so normal to them. And I think an example would be a recent asylum case I received that I'm still struggling to meet with this client. And I've been trying to get her into counseling so that I can like deal with it before I meet with her. So basically she comes from Honduras, and she was abandoned as a child. She was an orphan and raised by other family members who abused her. She was sexually assaulted a few times as a child. Then she was set up by family members to be kidnapped by, it's unclear if he's a gang member or not, but she was set up to be kidnapped. She was locked up with this person for 3 months and sexually assaulted, and she now has a child as a result of this. Also, there's a lot of gang violence in Honduras, so her brothers were threatened. She tried to stand up to gang members, and she was also threatened at gunpoint. It was just a lot of things that happened in her life that she could no longer endure being there. And she came from Honduras probably last year, and I submitted her asylum application because for asylum you only have 1 year from entry into the country to apply, so we had to do it pretty quickly. I think we were right on the deadline in July. And I think it was most striking to me because I can't imagine someone having gone through all those things like their entire life. And she even said to me, she's like, I never got a break, So meeting with her has been very difficult, and I know it's more difficult for her than it is for me. But I think this is not the first time, but definitely one of the times where I had a case where it's draining. So I think that would probably be a good example. You're welcome. I'm sorry, I was looking for that Texas thing because I really want to send it to you guys. I actually also have the article about no Haitians need apply. I can send that to you as well. But I know you have things to do with your class before you leave, so I'd just like to quickly talk about IJC if that's fine with you. So how many of you here are seniors? Oh, quite a few. Okay, good. So basically, the Immigrant Justice Corps, as I said before, chooses 25 law school graduates and 10 college graduates every year. I'm part of the first class of law school graduates, and they choose it from all around the country. Basically, you enter this fellowship to do immigration work. If you're a law school graduate, they're hoping that you become an immigration attorney, but if you are coming from college, many of the community fellows, well, I should explain. So since I graduated from law school, I'm a justice fellow. The ones who graduated from college are community fellows. Many of the community fellows do plan to go into many different fields, social work, journalism, things like that after this. But I think if you're really interested in immigration and you're really interested in working in the field, I think it's a great fellowship to apply for. Unfortunately, I don't know. I tried to find out when the application process starts, and I think it's mid-January for the next class coming in for September 2016, yes. So it's competitive, but I see no reason why you all shouldn't try to apply and get involved. They're looking for people who sort of think outside the box. And we have a lot of, dreamers and DACA recipients and people who are very much advocates for immigration reform, but I don't think we have a lot of people who are interested in journalism, who are interested in the media. So I think that would be something really interesting for them. So I printed something. I can give it to everyone. To apply, you have to be graduating this year or have graduated last year. But I can hand this out to everyone. I got this from the website. It might not be completely accurate because it's from last year, but it has the fact that it's a 2-year fellowship. It gives you the salary, tells you what you would be doing, and it explains what you would have to submit. So if you are at all interested, letters of recommendation and your statement of interest and stuff like that, you can start getting ready now. Does anyone have any questions about IJC and what we do? Thank you for having me. This is like my first speaking engagement since becoming a lawyer, so I don't know everything. I'm by no means an expert in anything. I just thought this was an interesting experience, and I'm happy that I got to speak to my fellow PACE people. So,
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
thank you.